The group of 20, comprising the world's richest and most powerful countries, will grant membership to the African Union. Sources said on Thursday the move would give the African Union, a continental body of 55 member states, the same permanent status as the European Union, that is the only regional bloc with a full membership status, up from its current designation of invited international organization. The G20 currently comprises 19 countries and the European Union, and the members represent around 85% of global gross domestic product, more than 75% of global trade, and about 2/3 of the world population. And now, what is left to be seen is what valuable contributions both entities will enjoy if and when the admission is given a thumbs up. Joining me for this conversation from London, United Kingdom, I have Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics. Gospel, it's nice to have you on the show once again.
Thank you for having me, Lekan. Great to be here again.
Good. So to put this discussion in proper context, how powerful and influential is the group of 20, and what significance does it have in international politics and economic matters?
Thank you so much, Lekan. First and foremost, the G20 significantly hold about 85% of global GDP to start with. So that's how powerful they are, all right? So, and you have majority of the institutions that drive the world HQ'd in the top institution, sorry, in the top killer of the G20, safe to say. All right, so I'm not surprised that you have such narrative right now on the table in terms of the quest to join in terms of membership by the AU. So it's likely expected, being the way the world has evolved in the times we live in, the recent geopolitical risk, climate change, exchange of investment, facilitating all of this value to ensure that no one is left behind. All right, so yes, so they control 5% of global GDP, of global wealth as well, and that's safe to say that they really are very hands-on on the state of issues or the state of play right now in the global economy.
Now, it has been affirmed that the G20 will grant African Union membership. Now, what does that mean for the body and the continent that the AU represents?
Well, fingers crossed. There is still no official statement yet from the G20 themselves. We are hearing this just from the AU guys and all that, so which is likely expected because it's what they want. So, I mean, give or take, it pulls through. It will be a huge plus in terms of facilitating, another level of opening in terms of investment access, and relationships, and all the support that African Union or African countries may need, in terms of breaking in and scaling what we're currently doing in the region. I mean, outside of the other argument that people have all over the place about African and independence on the West and foreign markets, you cannot really facilitate your agenda right now globally without any form of collaboration, or without any form of finding a middle ground, with other institutions that exist right now globally. On the flip side of things, we've seen a rising interest in not just independent African economies, but even Africa as a continent. So you've seen the US-Africa Summit, you've seen the China-African Summit, speculations around the Russia-African Summit, many interest around, how the West is seeking to partner or do more with African nations and Africa as a region. So that's another leverage point you want to think about. How do you facilitate commitment of the G7, of the G20 when it comes to the affairs around the African economy? However, my concern is what are we taking to the table of negotiation? Because this will bring a new level of access, it will bring a new level of exchange, new level of commitment, and all that. And commitment can be an interesting trade-off, when you don't have the value you're taking to the table, or things that you can use to facilitate an edge for you on the negotiation table.
Now, we see that countries like Germany, Brazil, South Africa, Canada, and the likes have voiced support for AU membership in the G20. And we know that the G20 has been in existence since 1999, and South Africa has been part of it. So why did it take it this long for the AU to be considered? And what makes the possible admission to the G20 apt? Because we know that in a couple of years back now, other continents have been having issues issues, economic issues, political issues, power struggle issues, and all that. And now we see them courting African countries, looking at how to solidify ties with them. And now we are seeing these African countries have a kind of tie or a kind of commitment with these European, the West, and all other continents as it is now. So why is it that at this point Africa is at the center stage of these talks? Is it because of the issues that these other continents are faced with that is now willing to pull Africa into its body or to draw it closer to it, or the other factors that we are not actually privy to?
The truth is that Africa is rising. You know, the world is beginning to reckon and understand the awakening of Africa. So it's not just rising as a continent, but we are literally beginning to take on the forefront of major walks of life now globally. That's one. Secondly, we also see the fact that the continent has shown lots of prospects in terms of what it has to offer, what it can deliver, especially when it comes to human capital. You know, safe to say, when it comes to entrepreneurship, you know, and many of these things. Yes, we're not there yet internally, but in terms of the prospect or the investable value of investing in Africa and all that, the promise is there. Secondly, the future of many of the nations in the G20 will be bleak, quote unquote, without support or without any form of strategic partnership with Africa. You know, so the reasons why you're seeing the US Africa Summit, the China Africa Summit, and all of these Africa Summits, you know, in fact, the France Africa Summit, all right? So individual member nations are beginning to hold, you know, their summits with Africa to facilitate this conversation. So you just have this conversation moving towards an aggregate level when you talk about the G20. I mean, and it's expected. So yes, the economy is rising, the African economy. South Africa has been at the forefront of the state of play, you know, being a member of BRICS and facilitating their exchange when it comes to regional markets and going to other parts of the world. So I'm not surprised that the focus has been shifted to Africa recently. Investments have shifted to Africa, and as such, you know, the case to be a member has also been, you know, has recently been on the table. So for me, it has prospects of a win-win, only if African leaders and the African people recognize what they have and collaboratively begin to push the lobby and the efforts towards investment and value that would be mutual for both parties.
Now, looking at the framework of the G20, it works to address major issues related to the global economy, talk about international financial stability, climate change mitigation, which is top on the front burner, and of course, sustainable development, as you've mentioned. By the time AU's membership is ratified, what are the major points of discussion you expect the body to bring to the front burner for the benefit of Africa?
I mean, I first of all would be establishing new ways or new investment entrants towards not just investing in the region, but, you know, spurring the necessary growth and development that the region needs. Climate change is also a central part of this conversation. We just saw the Africa Climate Summit recently completed, finished, and all that. So, and you know, there is that. Africa is already in the strategic center of the global state of things. So we're expecting more investment into the region. We're also expecting more commitments to the pledges that have been made over time, years ago. And you're also expecting a situation where Africa can possibly leverage, you know, all of these relationships and partnerships to scale its own ambitions or goal or aspirations, as the case may be. Now, I'm not speaking so much for this partnership. However, I'm expecting and hoping that we are going in there with an agenda. Otherwise, you know, the whole thing can really go south, you know, and it would literally be a move or a call to action that the next generation may not be very, very excited or happy with. Maybe another failure in disguise and all that. So to ensure that this whole thing lands right, Africa and Africans need to understand the value we're going with, and again, collaboratively drive that argument to deliver. But we're seeing a new wave of investment focused on climate change, maybe prosperity, which is also a very relative argument, you know, and also securing the future of those Western economies that are already in the G20.
Let's now look at the affiliation that these African countries have with other regional and continental bodies. We see that individual African nations and members have different continental ties with other bodies. So would that be at cross purposes with the interest and focus of the G20, and perhaps might be an impediment for AU and countries under its jurisdiction? As such, will be allowed to, or probably you would expect a bit of coexistence rather between what the G20 thinks and what African countries and the other bodies that they belong to, what they really think and what their focuses are.
Yes, to be honest, I agree with you. It's going to be a very complex relationship to tie up at the G20 level because different African countries have different levels of access, influence, and relationships with members of the G20, and many African countries are not there yet in terms of strategically positioned to negotiate value on the table. And safe to say as well, Africa as a continent hasn't shown the strength of collaboration enough within our context. So if you look at the ESCFTA and many of our regional competitiveness arguments, it's looking like nothing really has happened there, and we're still yet to properly break into the global market in terms of doing business and facilitating exchange. So I see that really not facilitating our successes forward with the G20. As a result, there are going to be lots of fragmented ways this relationship can evolve, which is why I'm saying it's still a developing story. Top of mind, they may want to consider that membership, but at the very core of that membership will be lots of fragments and complexities to deal. Also knowing the reality of lots of African economies in context. So, question: what do you have to bring to the table to be considered, even as a region, to be considered as a member of the G20, and what's the prospect of the G20 having you on the table? So it's a very complex diplomatic argument that we need to look at critically from different facets, and then wait to see how the story unfolds before we can make very intelligent judgments around that.
Well, Gospel, I haven't said that. And with Africa's reawakening and, of course, divergent interests in other bodies and superpowers, there have been this speculation that there's a possibility that there might just be an objection against the move from any of the member countries in the G20. So are there some superpowers within the G20 that may feel threatened about what influence, what potential that the AU might have when it is, when, of course, the membership is ratified?
I mean, to be honest, it's not out of place. It's not out of place, and considerably also when you look at it from the context of what value or what organized value. The word is actually organized value. What organized value is Africa really adding to the table? That's the question. Now, as independent countries, they have different values. They offer different members of the G20, but is that enough to say that we want to progress with a union-based membership? That's a different conversation. So on the grounds of that other argument, you may want to start, there may be need to probably begin to rethink those questions. And I think that those are very valid questions to ask, because even for ourselves, we've not been able to significantly say that this is the value we are collectively offering the world. We still don't have that definition yet. All right, the value that we seem like we offer the world has sprouted in spite of government, in spite of the fact that there's even absence of collaboration to start with. So it's just been happening like we're stumbling into the block and all of that, but nothing really at a very collaborative level that is really worth that high level consideration. However, if that consideration is given, it may be more on the clear low-hanging fruits and probably futuristic plan or agenda of the G20 that in this case may seem like what will favor them much more than the African countries in my context.
So in terms of probably goods, exports, and unemployment rates, job creation, and all other socioeconomic factors, do you think that when AU gets this membership, it will be able to drive conversation and operations around upscaling these areas of its economy?
Yes, I mean, that's the hope. And I'm intentional about the word hope because, again, how positioned are we to explore? So it's not just enough to say you want to be a member. Ask those who say they want to be a member, who are moving the motion to. Do they have a targeted strategic plan on how they want to make the most of the G20 platform? and number one, yet to see one, and number two, waiting to watch how they want to explore that plan confidently in the grand scheme of things. All right, so we're expecting that partnership also lead to increased access to markets, and it's going to happen both ways. And when it happens both ways, the individual with the strongest strategic move, I don't know if you get what I mean, would benefit, more than the other, and because I don't know, there's just a lot of moving parts to it. I'm hoping and expecting that Africa really has a plan to make the most of the G20 platform, because you've not achieved anything significant with ASFTA. What really is that strategic access to market value that you'll be gaining by working with the G20? Don't get me wrong. There are going to be low-hanging fruits, increased prospects for Africa. There are a lot of things that could just happen by being a member of that union. But in terms of mid to long-term, deep-level dynamics that affect the core of the African economy, what really is a strategic plan?
All right, to just wrap up this conversation, Gospel, I just want to add a twist to it. Now, the African Union was established in 2002, and it's a continental organization comprising of 55 member states from across Africa. Now, as we have seen, the recent surge in military coups on the continent is actually at variance with the political stance of the superpowers, which of course comprises the G20. And that actually underpins the whittling down of their influence, because we're beginning to see military incursions, military interventions, not incursions now, military coups in this African continent, we set to whittle down the power of these so-called superpowers. Now, when African Union gets control, do you think it would enforce their power and control over Africa's affairs? Because, of course, when they're able to absorb AU into its body, it would want to influence the decisions and the plans, the focus, and every other operational trajectory that African Union is hoping for Africa, and they might want to lord their opinion on them. Well, that's according to what some people have said. So I'd like to take your reaction on that too.
Yes, like I mentioned, it's going to be a very complex relationship. It's good because technically you can literally tell who is giving and who is taking, and even in the context of taking, how much are you giving, and do you have the kind of value that, at least the major block of its G20, needs from the country, and they really need at home to grow their own economy and all that. Do you really have that? And when you look at the dynamics of that complexity, there's a possibility as well that it's going to weigh in one-sided, meaning that you're likely going to get more influences on the state of affairs, in the African economy and even strategic African markets as well. All right. And it's already happening, even without the G20, it's already happening. All right. Now, if you now say you want to come into the G20 as a union, as a member union and something like that, think of the level at which those influences could be aggravated. All right. And when those requests are coming, your capacity to say no is dependent on where you are at the table, either where you're sitting at the table or either what you're offering at the table. 2 levels. All right. So, and on those 2 levels, we aren't there yet significantly. We just have the numbers, have the markets, snipers of stock working for us that we've not properly invested, applied our hearts and commitments and collaborative efforts to driving technically. So think of Afrobeats now. Afrobeats has literally happened in spite of government. It has happened in spite of Africa. It has happened in spite of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and all that, and it's moving into the shores of the deep corners of the G20. All right, the power blocks of the G20. So those kind of moves are not really coordinated by what's happening in the continent. They are happening in spite of them. All right, and second, also when you think about the fact that our institutions locally are not coordinated to scale those kind of transitions that are happening now. All right, then you understand that there are a lot of cracks at the basic, foundational, and fundamental level to scale or manage a complex relationship like this. So the possibilities that the relationship will likely go out of hand or may tilt to becoming another form of influence. Also knowing the fact that a lot of political instability in the context. In all fairness, there's still lots of political instability, even in Nigeria. All right, so those fears are very valid, and like I mentioned, the intelligence around how this will unfold is largely dependent on having to hear out what could happen at that summit, if that membership is going to be honored, and what will be the criteria or the modus operandi of that union or that membership or that engagement, as the case may be.
Well, Gospel, I tell you, it could be smooth and it could be complex, but then this is one chance for the AU to advance the cause and concerns of Africa at the global stage, and that will be telling on the continent. Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics, thank you for your time on the show.
Thank you for having me, Nico. Have a good day.
And you too. Now, as the world watches this pivotal moment in international diplomacy unfold, the G20's decision to extend membership to the African Union promises to reshape global governance and, of course, cooperation, reaffirming the organization's commitments to inclusivity and a more balanced representation of world nations. So the next thing we need to wait for is if AU will be granted that particular membership to take the conversations of Africa to that platform and see how it can benefit the continent on all sides. Let's go for a short break. You're watching Business Edge. We'll be back with more.